All right, let's get started, everybody. So thank you very much for coming to our first ever webinar, Building a Career in Energy Weather, Perspectives from Rookies and Veterans. So again, this is our first foray into the webinar theme. I know a lot of committees out there are trying to put out webinars, so we thought we'd take a stab at it too. And we definitely want to thank you for attending. Those that are on the line, you will notice there should be a Q&A option. So if you send those to, if you submit a question through there, it should come directly to me. So at the end of these presentations, we'll have time for some Q&As with our esteemed panelists. Also, I'm recording this webinar. Sometimes I can be challenged with technology, but I will do my best to get it up on YouTube or some website in due time for you to review, or anybody that that isn't here listening in that would be well served listening to what everyone has to say. It should be available for everybody to see. So a little bit of an introduction to what we'll be talking about today. So while we know a lot of times when there are webinars like this, people kind of talk directly about kind of what they do, what their job is at this point in time, but we wanted to kind of give a little more insight into what happens before now. Obviously, a lot of you guys on the line are, I know based on the registration, a lot of you guys are still in college. Some are new in the industry, some have been in for a little bit of time, but we thought it would be helpful for people to share their experiences getting into the energy weather industry. So yeah, as I have on that bullet point there, it's important to know what our jobs entail, but it's just important to know how we got here. And then of course, if you want to learn more about our energy committee, certainly let me know. I can establish dialogue or we can talk with our chair. The incoming chair, Chris Coleman, will be one of the speakers today, so he'll be a great guy to be in touch with as well. But yeah, certainly feel free to reach out. So a little bit about me before I hand it over to our panelists. So my name is Eric Wertz. I am the manager of Weather Data Solutions at Radiant Solutions, where I've been since 2009. If you've heard of us, you may know us as MDA Weather. For those that have been in the industry for a while, you may know us as EarthSat. But the common theme is we seem to keep changing names. But right now, we're Radiant Solutions. My background is I have a bachelor's and a master's in meteorology, both from Penn State, both in '09. It was a busy weekend of graduations. And I took the weather risk option. I was actually in the first class they had of the kind of the weather risk 101, if you will, at Penn State back in 2008. So that was a fun experience. And when I started at Radiant Solutions, MDA Weather at the time, I began as an operational meteorologist, kind of doing the day-to-day forecasting that a lot of our commodity traders and other clients use. But now I kind of work more with specific clients, traveling to conferences. You can see it as I was rummaging for a picture. That was me speaking at a user meeting for one of our energy load forecasting partners just a couple weeks ago. So I do that as well as presenting our seasonal outlooks. So without further ado, I will start with our first panelist. I'll introduce him briefly here. So Brent Rice, he is a meteorologist with IGS Energy. His responsibilities include providing weather briefings, seasonal forecasts, and analytical services to members of the company's supply department. Previously, he worked as an intern with the State College NWS as well as ERCOT, just as Chris Coleman will be speaking later. And he received his bachelor's degree in meteorology from Penn State with a concentration in weather risk management. So if I can find a way to take him off mute here. There we go. Brent, the floor is yours.
All right, awesome. Well, thank you, Eric, for introducing me. As he mentioned, my name is Brent Rice, and I'm a meteorologist at IGS Energy, which is located in Dublin, Ohio, which is just outside of Columbus, Ohio. So IGS Energy, just brief description, is kind of a retail provider of natural gas power. So basically what that means is you can either choose to get power or gas from your local utility, or you can go with a company like us. So I have been here at the company since January of 2017. So I've only really been in the energy industry about a year and a half right now. So for those of you who are still in college right now, you know, I'm definitely not very far removed from where you guys are right now. It wasn't long ago that I was in your shoes kind of figuring out what it was that I wanted to do and what I wanted to do with my degree in meteorology. So I thought I would just start by going back to what really drew my interest in meteorology and then kind of run through it from there. So I would say looking back, kind of my initial interest in meteorology grew as a teenager. And I would say a lot of that interest really stems from my dad. So I grew up on a dairy farm in south central Pennsylvania. My dad was a farmer, but he also kind of always had a knack for weather. I can distinctly always remember him coming in the evening and sitting down and watching the local weather, the evening news, and I would always kind of, you know, watch the local weather with him. And I think that's one of the things that really drove me towards my interest in meteorology. You know, at the time I didn't know exactly what you could do with that kind of a degree, but I thought it would just be something interesting to study. And that kind of stayed with me throughout the rest of my teenage years. Once I got to high school, though, I kind of second-guessed myself as I was starting to look at colleges and kind of thinking about a major and what I wanted to do. I was a little hesitant to maybe go into the field because I wasn't sure exactly that was what I wanted to do, and I wanted to avoid kind of getting halfway through a major and then saying, you know, hey, this isn't really what I wanted to do. So my plan instead, I actually started out as a physics major, and I figured, you know, if I wanted to go into meteorology after that, I could. If I wanted to go in some other sort of field, you know, that could take me there as well. So my freshman year, I was a physics major. I enjoyed the major, but I think, you know, it wasn't really best suited for me. A lot of the jobs and kind of people that had taken that path before me were going on to grad school, were doing some sort of research position, and that wasn't necessarily where I saw myself going. So I kind of reevaluated and took a step back and, you know, thought about what I really wanted to do. And at that point, I decided that I might as well just kind of go for it and pursue a degree in meteorology. So that's what I decided to do. So sophomore year, I transferred to Penn State, entered as a meteorology major. But again, going into it, still wasn't exactly sure what I wanted to do or really what you could do with that degree. The one thing I knew I didn't want to do was become a TV meteorologist. Nothing against anyone who wants to pursue that kind of a career. But definitely looking back, you know, I knew that wasn't for me. So when I got to Penn State, kind of started researching some of the options that they have. The way that the major is set up there, they have a couple of different concentrations that are geared towards different paths. They kind of have your path if you're, you know, interested in broadcast meteorology. There's definitely a path for that. They have, you know, an environmental path geared towards people that are looking towards the environmental side. There's another path geared towards people into research. There's a general option. But one of the options that they have is the weather risk management option, which Eric actually just mentioned. And that one kind of stood out to me. I thought that one was really interesting just because of the variety of classes and coursework that you got to take within that option. So I liked that it wasn't just necessarily meteorology focused. You got to take some classes kind of outside of the major and explore some other topics as well. And I thought that really suited me overall. And again, I wasn't exactly, you know, sure of the energy industry. I really had no background at all or knowledge of the energy industry going into it, but thought it would be kind of a cool path to pursue. So as I mentioned, one of the neat things about the weather risk program is really that variety of classes you get to take. Obviously, with it being more of a weather risk, one of the things it's focused on is kind of looking at that crossroads between weather and industry and really weather and the energy industry. So a lot of the classes I got to take were introducing you to topics such as, you know, futures markets, options, you know, what is hedging, and these kinds of things. And all of this was really new to me, but I found this really interesting overall. And even though, you know, I look today at what I'm doing currently, you know, I'm not out there trading commodities. I am not buying and selling options or anything like that. But just to kind of have that basic knowledge coming into the energy industry is definitely useful, because those are terms that I hear talked about all the time. So just to have that kind of framework of knowledge coming in here, I feel like it was extremely beneficial as I transition into this type of role. One of the cool classes that you get to take at Penn State, if you're in this option, kind of your senior capstone, is you get to do this class where you get to do a trading simulation, either in the natural gas futures market, the power market, or at least when I was there, they did a soybean trading simulation as well. But really you just get to learn about market fundamentals, how weather influences markets, what other are out there influencing the market. So it was really kind of a cool class for me. So definitely got to take a lot of those more energy market related classes, which was kind of cool. One of the other things that this specific option kind of stressed was more statistics related classes. And I kind of took it a step further. You know, I had always been someone that was more of a math and science kind of person. I like thinking logically. So I actually minored in statistics. So some of the classes that I got to take were more focused on regression analysis, time series, looking at Bayesian statistics, p-values, f-stats, all that good kind of stuff. And it's interesting as I think about what I do here, again, on a day-to-day basis. You know, I'm still actually using some of the stats that I learned back in college. So in hindsight, you know, it's actually a pretty good decision, I think, to kind of take some of those extra stats classes. And I think one of the other things that is kind of, or one of other groups of classes that you got to take is outside of your traditional meteorology path with some programming classes. So you had the option to take a Python class within this option. So I took that class. Also took an elective in SQL, and if you're not familiar with SQL, it's more of just a language that's used to query data from a database. I also use that on a day-to-day basis. So it's kind of interesting looking back, you know, at the time, you know, a lot of these classes were attractive to me just because I was getting a whole bunch of different topics kind of within one major, but I look at what I'm doing today, and a lot of these are really related to what I'm actually doing in my day-to-day job. In terms of some of the internships that I did, I initially interned at the National Weather Service. So in State College, there's a local branch of the National Weather Service. Every semester they take about 1 or 2 students, I believe. So I interned there. Kind of a cool experience just to get a little bit more forecasting under my belt, just really to see how the National Weather Service works in general. But I think one of maybe the key internships that I also took was one at ERCOT. And this was kind of just on a whim. This was one that I saw online, just kind of applied to, not necessarily thinking that I'd actually get it. Actually ended up going and really enjoying myself down there. If you're not familiar with ERCOT, you can ask Chris Coleman, who we'll talk a little bit later. He is the meteorologist at ERCOT, and he was my boss during my time there. Really great guy. But ERCOT basically oversees the power grid for about 90% of Texas. So this was kind of my first, you know, real-world experience in the energy industry. I wasn't necessarily familiar with how power markets and the power industry really worked. So really just kind of eye-opening, generally speaking, to see how all of that works, and to get, you know, hands-on experience seeing what a meteorologist actually, you know, can do in the energy industry. So I got to see how Chris, you know, puts together his seasonal forecasts and his daily forecasts and those types of things, which were, you know, really valuable experience. Also got to work with, you know, real-life data, which was the first time I had ever done that, so I did a couple projects. One of my main ones was looking at wind power and trying to relate when are wind power forecasts more accurate as compared to other times, and is that related to certain weather patterns that we see throughout the summer. So that was one of the projects I got to do. Again, got to use some of that some of those programming skills, which was really useful for me. But overall, out of that experience, I think, you know, that really solidified the thought that, you know, hey, regardless of exactly what I'm doing, whether I end up in more of a forecasting position, more of a data position, what have you, I wanted to go into the energy industry in some capacity. So definitely looking back, I'm tremendously thankful for that experience that I had down at ERCOT. After I graduated in December of 2016, was really fortunate to be able to find an internship here at IGS Energy. Kind of initially it was a 6-month thing. They had never had a meteorologist here at the company before, so it was almost like a trial period, if you want to call it, to see what impact a meteorologist could have here on the company. Unfortunately for me, after the 6-month period, they decided to keep me on full-time, and I have been here ever since. So I've been very fortunate to have this experience as well. I was trying to think of some things, kind of looking back, sort of, some advice to give to those of you, especially who are in college right now, still have some time to take some classes and thinking about how they can, gain more knowledge before they go out into the field. So a couple things I would throw out there. Number one, I would always encourage people to take some programming classes. I don't know everyone's experiences, but definitely from what I've seen, there's so much use in knowing some sort of programming language, if not more. The energy industry there is really a data-driven industry. So being able to manipulate data to do some sort of analyses, whether that's on weather data, whether that's on usage data, what have you, I think is a tremendous skill and is really going to help you find a job, whether you go in the energy industry or whether you actually end up in some sort of industry outside of weather. One of the other things I would kind of say, and I would encourage you to do is, develop some skills, outside of meteorology and forecasting. I wouldn't want you to limit yourself to just forecasting in your traditional meteorology classes. Definitely go out there and take a couple classes, take a couple math classes, take a couple stat classes or econ or what have you. But just to make yourself a little bit more rounded, again, I think that definitely would help boost, your appeal to companies as you go out and start looking for jobs. And the last thing I would really say, and we'll talk about, is communication. In this industry especially, communication is key. We're dealing with a very scientific and sometimes very complicated and confusing kind of a field. So being able to take this complicated forecast and boiling it down to something simple that a trader or someone else at your company can understand is, really huge. And that's something that I've had to grow in really fast here. Not that I am a amazing communicator by any means, but it's definitely a skill I've had a lot of chance to work on, even just during my first year and a half here. So, anytime you have the opportunity to, speak in front of a group or do something else in school, I'd encourage you to do it, because that's definitely going to be a valuable skill that's going to help you out in this field overall. So with that, that's really all I had to say. I guess I will hand it back over to Eric then.
Yeah, thanks, Brent. No, that was great. Yeah, again, I don't have any yet, I don't think. I'm losing myself to all the windows here on the screen. I don't think I have any questions yet, but if you have any for Brent, you can certainly shoot them to him or myself. We can address them or get to them to the end of the show. But to move things along now, we will move over to Zach Johnson. So get the slide to move. So he got his bachelor's from Oklahoma just 4 years ago, and then in 2016 got his master's from Ball State. Currently, he's at Utah State University as a PhD candidate. He, too, is actually a former intern down at ERCOT, and he's interested in renewables, load forecasting, and land-atmospheric interaction, along with climate modeling. And with that, I will let Zach take it away.
Thank you, Eric. So again, my name is Zach Johnson. I'm originally from San Francisco, California. And I think, like many of you, had a passion for all things weather growing up, despite the humdrum weather in California. So after studying abroad right after high school, I ended up going to the University of Oklahoma and earned a bachelor's in meteorology. I think my decision to go to Oklahoma probably stemmed from just the volatile weather they have there. And probably not the best idea to go to Oklahoma for that, but it ended up working out great. And after taking a year to work in between undergrad and graduate school, I pursued a master's degree in atmospheric science at Ball State University in Indiana. And then right after that, I interned at ERCOT under Chris Coleman, similarly how Brent interned at ERCOT. I think he was the intern right before me. And I worked on a similar project as him. I think we used the same programming language in R, and I basically assisted Chris in producing climatological maps of Texas to kind of hone in on the state of Texas compared to just looking at the United States as a whole. And that internship was just incredibly valuable to me, and I learned so much through it. And then after that internship, I ended up pursuing a PhD. I wasn't quite sure if I wanted to go that route or maybe go directly in the private industry as an energy meteorologist, but I decided to do my PhD here at Utah State, and I'm looking at kind of climate modeling. I'm looking at how weather extremes can affect, or excuse me, how drought can have a long-lasting impact in certain parts of the world, and how we could predict that better in the long term. And that definitely has a connection to energy meteorology, especially at a ISO like ERCOT. And so I also have interest, like it says on the slide, in renewables, land-atmospheric interaction, electrical load forecasting, which is actually the team at ERCOT that I interned in. It's called the Electrical Load Forecasting Department, and climate modeling. So what steered me towards weather as a career choice? Like I said before, just growing up loving weather. I wasn't sure if I wanted to be a meteorologist on TV, but that's kind of all I knew at that point. So I decided to pursue that at Oklahoma anyways. So like many of you, I was going to act on my passion in meteorology, and I haven't stopped yet. But as I was in Oklahoma, I realized that TV meteorology was not for me, and so maybe I wanted to forecast at the National Weather Service. Well, those jobs are really, really hard to get. I applied for them, never got it. So then maybe I thought, oh, I can go in the private sector. You know, there are so many options in the private sector, like aviation meteorology, consulting, energy meteorology. But what really ultimately kind of steered me towards energy meteorology was not until I met Chris Coleman, who's at ERCOT, who Brent also interned in, at the American Meteorological Society conference in Seattle. And after talking with him, I realized that energy meteorology is a really cool thing. And after interning at ERCOT, I realized that I was fascinated between the connection of weather and energy. And I think in the future, it's going to be, you know, more important as we go in the future because, you know, there's I think a lot of money in how weather affects the energy industry. So the classes that I ended up taking that kind of helped me towards energy meteorology, there weren't many. At Oklahoma, they kind of have a strict just kind of path that you take, you know, a lot of hard dynamics courses and thermodynamics and physical meteorology like radiation. But there is one class I took which was called Climate and Renewable Energy, and we learned the basics of how renewables like solar and wind energy and how they kind of connect with traditional energy sources. And I think that's going to be interesting. There's going to be, you know, solutions in the long term of how to deal with that. So I think I think the internship at ERCOT kind of really geared me towards energy meteorology in the future. So I think there's a lot of potential in this industry of how weather connects with energy in the future. And I think what Brent also said was, Brent said to kind of have more of an interdisciplinary approach to your undergrad, like you said, to take an economics course or a computer science course or a statistics course. And I think those are all really important. For me, learning computer science has really helped me a lot through my PhD work, but it also, you know, helped me a lot in the energy side of things because, like Brent said, it's a data-driven industry. So I think being able to kind of step outside of meteorology, focus on meteorology, but also take some other coursework to kind of create a more holistic, or just, to kind of create a more interdisciplinary or more whole approach to how, when you graduate and when you're looking for jobs. So I think what helped me a lot was getting an internship, and I think that's pretty important for finding that permanent job in the energy industry. I think that's all I got for you guys right now. I'm going to send it back off to Eric.
Awesome. Thanks for that, Zach. That was really helpful. Again, reminder, feel free to ask questions. We'll get to them at the end. And also one thing, just remember what I meant to point out after Brent spoke. You probably might notice our emails at the bottom of these slides here. We put them here, so you're feel free to scribble them down, and if you don't want to ask questions here, you can take them offline and ask us there. I would put our phone numbers there, but I don't think the other panelists would very much appreciate their cell phone numbers being on YouTube for all time, and I probably wouldn't want mine there either. So yeah, you are more than welcome to email us afterwards. But we will move this along to the next panelist, who is Jared Lee. He's a project scientist, too, at the National Center for Atmospheric Research, otherwise known as NCAR, over in Boulder, Colorado. He earned a BA in physics from Gustavus Adolphus College in Minnesota and got his master's and PhD in meteorology from Penn State. After he got his doctorate in August of 2012, he was a National Research Council Research Associate at Naval Postgraduate School in Monterey, California for a year, and then a postdoc researcher at NCAR before being hired full-time as a project scientist in NCAR's Research Applications Laboratory in May of 2014. His research interests there include numerical weather prediction, ensemble configuration, wind and solar energy forecasting, surface transportation and road weather, cloud microphysics, boundary layer meteorology, atmospheric transport and dispersion, air quality forecasting, and atmospheric data assimilation. So see there, he's got a lot on his plate there at NCAR and does a lot of work on the energy side. And that's why I asked him to come here. I know he does a lot of great research, especially on wind and solar, which while many of us here, especially me being familiar with the private side, we might be kind of more on the commodities, natural gas. Just as important, especially becoming more important in these times, is the proliferation of wind and solar throughout the energy sphere. So with that, I will hand it over to Jared Lee.
All right, thanks, Eric. And by the way, the slide hasn't been advanced yet here in the webinar. But yeah, like Eric said, I graduated with a physics degree, a Bachelor of Arts in Physics, which is a bit interesting, from Gustavus Adolphus College, which is a small liberal arts school in southern Minnesota, about an hour southwest of Minneapolis. I actually started, I went there. I had applied to schools like Oklahoma and Wisconsin and whatnot for meteorology for undergrad, but I got the advice from my brother's father-in-law, who was a graduate dean at Northwestern University in Evanston. He recommended the path of majoring in physics in undergrad and then specializing in grad school. Now, I had known since I was 5 years old that I loved the weather and wanted to do something with the weather. So I actually came into, I was probably one of the few people who came into undergrad, or before I was even done with high school, I knew that I wanted to do grad school in meteorology. So physics at Gustavus, and it's a very rigorous program at Gustavus. That was basically just a path for me to get to a specialty in meteorology. So at the time, I had no inkling about energy meteorology. I started out at Penn State in 2005, just a couple days before Hurricane Katrina hit. So up in the Weather Center, we were all watching that. That was a pretty big weather event to start my graduate career at Penn State with. Anyway, we just basically took the regular slate of classes. In the graduate program at Penn State, there wasn't any sort of specialization for different sorts of meteorology. Obviously, there were different courses that you might take, but there wasn't, say, a track for energy meteorology at the time. And I started out with a master's thinking, well, I'm not sure, since I hadn't really done much with atmospheric science to that point, I wasn't sure how I would like grad school, if I would want to stick around for the PhD. But what helped me also back at Gustavus is I did a study abroad for the first semester of my senior year in Australia, and I chose that college, Monash University, because they had atmospheric science classes available, whereas my college, Gustavus, did not. So I chose my study abroad based on who had, or what universities had that spoke English or taught in English and had atmospheric science classes. And Monash also specifically had fluid dynamics on offer in that semester, and that's actually why I chose that school for my study abroad. So I took 3 meteorology and atmospheric science classes, and then 1 camping and hiking class when I was there. But that experience of basically going out and knowing that I had a shortcoming in wanting to do grad school in meteorology, knowing that I didn't have any meteorology classes in my undergrad, I went out and got that experience. And that actually is what got me noticed at Penn State, applying from this little school in southern Minnesota that very few people outside the Midwest have ever heard of. So I was grateful to get an opportunity at Penn State. And when it came time to decide if I was going to stick around for my PhD or move on to the private sector or something like that, I decided that I really liked my research group and my advisor, and I loved Penn State and living there, so I decided to stick around. That's not necessarily the greatest reason to stick around for a PhD. Normally, you need to be, the best advice is to be really driven, like, I want to put myself through all the trials and travails of grad school and the stress of grad school to get a PhD in order to do, X, Y, or Z, in order to do this specific job. But when I decided to stick around for the PhD, it's kind of like thinking to myself, okay, my goal for several years has been to get to grad school in meteorology. Now what? At that point, I didn't know what I wanted to do afterward. So I spent 2 or 3 years just thinking about looking around at what various people were doing, friends were doing, what jobs they were getting after they moved off. And I kind of realized that I at least did not want to be a faculty member at an R1 university, at a major research university like a Penn State or an Oklahoma, Wisconsin, or Washington, a place like that. I wanted to have a better balance of work and family life. So while I was at Penn State in late 2010, my advisor, Sue Ellen Haupt, left Penn State for NCAR and brought me and 2 other grad students of hers with her. So I was able to finish my Penn State degree. At that point, I was all but dissertation. I didn't have to take any classes, which is why I could move. So I moved out to Boulder, finished my Penn State PhD research while working at NCAR as a grad student. Got my degree in summer of 2012, and I was able to get a postdoc at Naval Postgraduate School in Monterey, California, with Josh Hacker, who was also appointed part-time at NCAR, knew a lot of the people that I was working with and for at NCAR. So I was able to get that postdoc. A month after I arrived there, told him that I'd gotten engaged and that was, we were planning a wedding in the summer, that was changing some conference plans and travel plans. He said, time out, congratulations, that I'm moving back to NCAR permanently and I want you to come with me. So a few months later, I ended up moving back to NCAR, so I've been brought here twice by advisors moving to NCAR, so I guess I'm supposed to be here. So I was then a postdoc at NCAR for a few months and then hired on as a project scientist in in spring of 2014. And that's, when I was hired on as a project scientist, that's when I really started getting into renewable energy. Because the project that was going on at the time, and the reason why there was money available to hire me as a full-time, quote-unquote, permanent employee, was this huge DOE Sunshot-funded project where NCAR was the lead organization for several universities, several power utilities. It was a public-private academic partnership for improving solar power forecasting. And through that project, I contributed to helping to build something called the Sun Forecast solar power forecasting system. And we have a few, several papers out on that. And that's kind of really what got me into the renewable energy research area. And since then, I've also been I've been on several other mainly renewable energy forecasting projects, where what we do is at NCAR, we're a federally funded research and development center. So we can do projects as long as there is some sort of research component to them. So we could help a sponsor set up some sort of quasi-operational forecasting system and help them design that and improve that. But at the end of the contract, then we have to hand that off either to the sponsor themselves, or some third-party private company to be running that operational forecast for them. So everything we do has to have some sort of research component. And we try to use numerical weather prediction models, satellite data assimilation, machine learning, and artificial intelligence techniques to try to predict, to try to make better predictions of not just what the wind speed or what the solar irradiance is going to be at a particular location, but what the utilities, what really matters for the utilities is how much power is going to be produced. And so a big part of our systems that we design here at NCAR include this power conversion aspect to them. So we take what our various models are predicting for for wind speed or for solar irradiance, and then based on historical data, we're able to convert that into our best prediction of power. So some of the projects that I'm working on right now, like today I've been working on writing up a final report for a wind resource assessment for Bangladesh. That's sponsored by NREL, the National Renewable Energy Laboratory. We have several collaborations with NREL, and just wrapped up a month ago also a wind resource evaluation for the offshore areas of Alaska. They're hoping to expand wind energy up in Alaska on a project right now that's sponsored by EPRI, the Electrical Power Research Institute, and NYPA, the New York Power Authority, on improving solar power forecasting for New York. And also a big project doing the same thing in Kuwait. This is a really, renewable energy forecasting has really been developing a lot in the last few years, really advancing as different states, different countries, and different utilities are really starting to ramp up the amount of renewables that they have in their portfolio, at which point weather becomes important. Before renewables, it seemed like the most relevant thing for or impact of weather on the power sector was using temperature to forecast load or to predict what the load was going to be, or if there's some winter storm coming in, trying to predict, okay, we might have some power outages in this area from snow and ice and wind, that sort of thing. But now we're really trying to help utilities realize that that they need weather forecasting, and sometimes going to a couple months ago, I had the opportunity to go to the Colorado Solar Energy Industries Association conference here in the Denver metro area, and there's some acknowledgement of the importance of weather and forecasting, but it's not always on everyone's radar screen. So a big part of what we do at NCAR is trying to make people aware that they need weather forecasting if they're trying to predict what their how much renewables they're going to be able to have to then manage the rest of their gas and coal portfolios. One area that I see really coming on in the next few years is using weather forecasting to help predict storage, to predict the battery loading and the battery charging and then discharge, and managing that for grid stability and for optimizing prices and things like that. That's going to be a whole new area and a very complicated area to try to get into in the next few years. So thinking of the questions like, my first job or internship, what helped me get it was really knowing people, building relationships with people, being in the right time and place when these positions open, and there's kind of no way around it. A lot of getting whatever job you are in, whatever sector you're in, even if it's totally outside of meteorology, a lot of whatever job you get is who you know and when you know them. And so it's really important when you go out to conferences to to try to get to know some people, and maintain good relationships with your professors, especially because your professors' recommendations are key to getting you that first job in particular. The meteorology community is a fairly small community, and AMF has people attending the annual meeting, which is still a pretty small community. Almost everyone knows everyone, or knows someone who knows all these other people. So it's really important also to not burn bridges. Do everything you can to maintain relationships, to do good work. Strive for excellence in the work that you do. That'll help you get noticed as well. It's good to take programming classes. I didn't have any programming when under my belt when I arrived at Penn State, so I had to play catch up, but ended up learning some Fortran, dealing with the WRF model. Now I do most of my programming in MCL, which is N-Core command language, and starting to dabble in Python a little bit as well. I'll be having to learn a little bit of SQL for one of my research projects in the next month or so. Programming is definitely very, very helpful. And the other thing that I would recommend is really focus on learning how to write and communicate well. In whatever job you're in, that will serve you excellently. Learning to write and give good presentations will get you noticed. And so it might seem like drudgery to be writing all these papers in undergrad or even in grad school, but writing and communication is just a key fundamental skill that often gets overlooked. Because my attitude is, if I can't communicate my research well, then it almost means, it kind of takes away some from the point of even doing the research, of even doing the work, if I can't talk about it and describe it well. So that's just a really, really important fundamental thing, and it will help you get that first job and move on to other jobs, or get you into grad school and then get you noticed out of grad school for your first job too. People know you as a good, just an excellent communicator. That'll be really good for you. So that's about all I have. I think I've gone about 16 minutes, so a minute longer than I should have. So I'll turn it back over to Eric now.
Thanks, Jared. No, that was great. And yeah, I can definitely echo the very cliche but very true. It's a lot of times it's not what you know, it's who you know. And that got me in the door with my interview at Radiant then MBA. And then, yeah, when I had my interview too, I can certainly say that they didn't really quiz me on anything weather related. I mean, they know having the degree, I was probably good on that. what they wanted to know was, could I communicate? So I remember that interview well, and making me do mock phone calls and mock reports. And it really wasn't about the forecast, it was about how you get it across. So, but yeah, definitely very good tip for those of you looking to get into the field. And I do see you do have a question, Jared. We'll save that for the end, but if you wanted to just look around and get a look at that, we'll probably address that first when we get the question portion. Okay. But without further ado, we will move on to our final speaker of the evening, our veteran of the crew, Chris Coleman. He's got his Bachelor's of Science from University of Nebraska-Lincoln. He's got quite the impressive resume, spanning from DTN to Planalytics to Exelon, and then now over at ERCOT, where he's been dealing with different forecasting tasks for many different regions for quite some time. So definitely glad to have you here, Chris, and looking forward to hearing your insights. So take it away.
Thank you very much, Eric. Yeah, I guess I am the veteran of the group, and that just happens. So, in fact, this June, it will be 25 years as a career meteorologist, and this past March, it was 10 years as a meteorologist in the energy industry. And I really don't know how all that time passed by, but it did. And a lot of things have changed since I came out of college way back in 1992, University of Nebraska in Lincoln, Nebraska, and that happens to be my hometown as well. And like everyone before me, and I have never met a meteorologist that has told me something different, and that is at some point in their youth, something clicked, and they kind of had a sense this was a direction they may take or they were definitely going to take. And for me, it was probably around age 8 or 9, and just growing up in Nebraska and the changing wild swings of the weather and wanting to know more about it. I remember calling up, this was pre-internet, calling up the local time and temperature and recording the temperature on a graph every day. I remember hailstorms in Nebraska and running outside and collecting hailstones the size of golf balls or larger, putting my life at risk. That's when I knew I needed to get into meteorology. And you see, so I've been in a lot of different fields. There's a lot more options available now than when I came out in 1992. There was no energy industry option. And back then, the energy industry was mainly made up just local utilities. And they would rely basically on just whatever, again, a lot of this was pre-internet, whatever they'd see in the newspaper for weather or TV or the National Weather Service. That was what they applied to their forecasting for the local utilities. Obviously, that's changed a lot here since the early 90s, and the energy industry has grown a bit, and now there's a lot more governing bodies within the energy industry, which is basically the type of company I work for now with ERCOT. And yeah, put most of my emphasis on explaining what ERCOT is, just in the essence of time, because we only have about 10 minutes left here, and I could speak for quite a while. Actually, to take a tangent from that, in speaking quite a while, that's what I did earlier today. I gave an hour-long presentation to a group that work the ERCOT energy market, and people from all over the United States. I do this frequently, and today's discussion was an analysis of Hurricane Harvey and its impacts on ERCOT region, which being the state of Texas. And this is very common for the energy industry, and there was an emphasis from each one of our 3 prior speakers, and that was in communications, presentation skills, that type of thing. When I was back in school at the University of Nebraska, I almost double majored in English. I ended up just getting out of college with a minor in English, but I realized the value then going forward into really, as Jared pointed out, no matter what direction you take in life, I think there's nothing more valuable than good communication skills. Yeah, I've definitely noticed it in the energy industry more than any other industry I was in prior to this. With my meteorology career, you are working very close with people internally, especially, sometimes externally when I give presentations like I did today to groups outside of ERCOT. But on a day-to-day basis, I am giving talks in the morning to our system operators. I work with our outage coordination. I send frequent emails. I give many internal talks. I work odd hours at times. People are always needing more information, and a lot of energy companies are pretty small in their weather departments. I happen to be the only meteorologist at ERCOT, so there's a lot of reliance on not only your time, but your ability to communicate and communicate well. So that would be, for me, I think that's the #1 priority if you were to get into the energy field. And some of the other things mentioned, yes, script writing, programming, that wasn't really an option for me back in the late 80s, early 90s, which is why I hired my last 2 interns, which spoke earlier, because they are much more familiar with script writing than I am. And but that is a huge plus. In fact, I would call it a necessity in today's world of meteorology, including the energy industry. Internships, as you heard my last 2 interns, there's obviously some value to internships. Considering my last 2 interns were our first 2 speakers here, if you can find the opportunity, and it's not always easy, there's not a lot of internships available, but keep your eyes open. If you have any interest, I'd say that means as much as your GPA, just having that background, getting your feet wet, spending a summer working for energy or utility is a great way to obtain knowledge and looks spectacular on your resume. All right, well, I'll tell you a little bit about ERCOT since I mentioned doing that. That stands for the Electric Reliability Council of Texas, and that's called an independent service operator. So what that means is we regulate the generation and transmission of electricity across the Texas power grid. So we aren't the company that sends you bills or anything like that. We're a nonprofit company that is working for balance in not only the financial aspects, but also the supply of energy, electricity in the state of Texas, meeting the demand, which is called the load. So we're always trying to balance that fine line to make sure there's enough supply available from our power generation to meet the demand, just the residential and business and industrial customers that need that electricity. We don't want to have too much supply available, too much generation, you know, whether it's coal or nuclear or solar or wind or natural gas generating electricity. You don't want to have too much online, because then those people can't make money. But you definitely don't want to have too little, because if you're not generating enough power, then there's going to be people without electricity, and then we would be forced to take portions of the state regionally, locally, and force a rolling outage, which is a nightmare scenario. That's happened twice in the last 20 years at ERCOT, and we ideally hope that never happens again. So my role then is to provide weather input to make that balance between supply and demand as close as possible. And not only on a today basis and a tomorrow basis, where the markets are also heavily involved, but also next week, maybe 2 weeks out, we have all of these power plants in the state of Texas, and at some point during the year, maybe multiple times, they need to shut down for a while to do maintenance work. And it's my job to say, hey, yeah, I know this major power plant in South Texas wants to go offline next week to do their maintenance work, but it looks like a really hot week, and I don't think we can afford to have that power plant offline. So I will provide that input to help make sure we have that generation available. We also work with financial settlements of the power markets, again, but we're a neutral nonprofit party. Well, let's see what else. So I'm doing day-to-day forecast, short range, medium range for the outage coordination, and I also do long-range forecasting, and we do a lot of our planning for the season ahead based on my weather forecast. So I am actually wrapping up a summer weather outlook currently for the state of Texas. That, just to note, there is an ERCOT. If you go to ERCOT.com, there'll be an About section at the top left, and you click that, and you'll see a menu pop down, and there'll be a weather link there. And you click that, it'll give you my local or my city-by-city forecast for the next 7 days with the text discussion. You'll also see a subsection there, which is my seasonal updates. My summer forecast for Texas will be there next Monday or Tuesday, May 1st time frame or a little bit before that. And we need to, as a company, if we see it's going to be a blistering hot, abnormally hot summer, Texas always has a hot summer, hotter than usual, stretching the limits of our generation, then we may do things like we always have some reserve units, power generating units that they tend to just sit there for months or years as kind of a backup, and we say, hey, we may need to bring those on for this summer, which costs money, so it's a big decision to make, but that's the reason I do these long-range forecasts as well. Let's see, I'm trying to think if there's anything else because we're just about a minute away from finishing. Yeah, classes that benefited me was just general synoptic satellite meteorology. I didn't have the opportunities to do all the programming. As I mentioned, English, was taking English courses, just having good presentation, communication skills. I always say it's important anywhere you go in the meteorology industry, especially in the energy industry. You have some real harsh critics internally, is to grow some thick skin. Hopefully that just you know that already, but I found in my 10 years in the energy industry, especially my job prior to ERCOT when I was working with power traders, that if you're wrong, they're going to want to know why you were wrong, and they're going to point a finger at you, and you just got to get used to that. And they actually love and appreciate if you just say, hey, you're right, I was wrong, and this is what happened. So that's one thing I've definitely learned over my many years as a meteorologist. It is, you're going to make mistakes. That's the nature of the business. You're not going to always be right, even though we all strive for that. But don't be afraid to own up to it. And the energy industry in the next 5 to 10 years, I think Jared covered quite a bit of that. The renewables have been increasing quite a bit here this decade. Texas has a lot of wind power. We're just now getting into the solar power. It's been increasing over the last couple of years. That's what, if I was a student right now, I would do anything I could to learn as much about the solar industry as possible, because that's the sector within the energy industry that is growing the most rapidly currently, and there's plenty of opportunities now, and there will be increasing numbers of opportunities in the solar sector. And I think I'd better just stop there. I could talk forever, but I know Eric wants to wrap this up. So, and feel free to reach out, send me an email. I'll help you as much as I can.
Awesome. Thanks a lot, Chris. And yeah, actually, so one question came in. I'm not sure if you saw it. And with that, Brent, Jared, muting all of you. One came in that said, which renewable energy sector would you recommend if you had to pick one? And you basically the answer that I gave. Someone might be able to make a case for other options like wind, but if I kind of just, getting the off-the-cuff question like that, I would probably say solar too. I mean, we can't make roofs out of wind turbines, but we can out of solar panels. So I
Yep.
definitely, yeah, I believe solar as well is probably, if you're going to focus your efforts on one renewable sector, that's probably the one to do it.
Yep, I'd agree.
So with that, I'll see if any other questions.
So Eric, for the questions that came in via text on this Q&A, for the benefit of the recording, should I repeat them and then also just repeat my answer that I wrote?
Sure, yeah, go for it, Jared.
Okay, so one question that I got was asking me what are the trade-offs of working at NCAR rather than NREL for energy research. From someone who's pursuing a BS in environmental physics and mathematics and is interested in getting a PhD to do energy research. So my brief answer, in my view, NREL seems to be more focused on the engineering side of energy meteorology, and they also do a lot of cutting-edge research into new energy technologies, like the actual physical technologies of energy generation and transmission. Whereas NCAR's focus is more on the weather and climate side, and as I mentioned, everything we do has a research component to it. And in the Research Applications Laboratory, or RAL, everything we do, we turn into an application that gets handed over to the sponsor. That's a forecasted product, often something like that. NCAR is also not, strictly speaking, we're not government employees, where I believe NREL is, so that there are some bureaucratic differences that come into play there. But yeah, NCAR is a great place to work. It's my dream job. I'm in my dream job. I'm not looking to go anywhere else. And then another person wrote in, could you please tell us more about what you do and how you do solar power forecasting and a wind resource evaluation project? Answering those more in depth will take more time than there probably is time available here. What I'll say is that I'm a co-author on some publications that explain more about this, and some of those are in print, some of those are book chapters, some of those are papers I'm currently writing. So feel free to check out my, or email me, or check out my NCAR staff page for a list of my publications and CVs, or my CV. Look up some of those, and I'm happy to answer any questions. It's just that's a bit more of an in-depth answer than time allows for here.
Yeah, we could probably dedicate a whole nother seminar to each of those topics.
Absolutely.
So for the person that asked that question, I think he typed it in the chat box, but there's a link right there for his user page he was talking about, and his email as well. But yeah, so thanks for doing that, Jared. In the interest of time, I'll go with one more question here that I think I'll open up to the floor, but I can answer first. And I think it's really, important to talk about what everybody should look to do and what they want to do, but are there kind of any things that you should avoid doing? But when I kind of came up with that question, Brent actually touched on kind of a lot of how I would answer that, and it's don't make yourself just don't pigeonhole yourself into one specific skill. While you could be the best forecaster in the world, a lot of companies are looking for more than that. You need to, again, be good at communicating. You need to find ways to ingest and manipulate data. Kind of think of ways that people basically finding ways to tell people what they want to know before they even know that they want to know it. So yeah, for kind of the what not to do, it's definitely don't just go straight line down one path. Some people might have success doing that, but making yourself a lot more kind of diversified in the different types of skill sets you have, whether that's programming or math or economics or something else, is incredibly helpful. So I don't know if anyone else wants to speak to that at all.
Agreed.
Yeah, being able to diversify your skill set is definitely invaluable. and I would say also with forecasting, like if you're the best synoptic forecaster that you can be, eventually computers are going to take that job. So that's again, like knowing programming is going to be something that will serve you really well, and always be willing to learn and adapt to new things, to especially like in the research and academia sectors, with funding cycles going up and down. Periodically, you do have to kind of reinvent yourself and start becoming an expert in a slightly different subfield, so that you can write proposals and grants to get funded, so that you can keep your job. So being willing to pay attention to where trends in the industry, where things seem to be going, and with those trends will help.
Yeah, I think I agree with Jared on that, having a well-rounded background. So I think you need to be able to fall back on something. So, minor in computer science, maybe you could, instead of going to meteorology, you could end up going into data science, or, or take a minor in GIS, or partake in the weather challenge to increase your forecasting skill. There's so many other kind of options on the boundary of meteorology that will help you become more well-rounded and give you more choices for jobs, especially as you go out of college.
Awesome.
Yeah, so this is Chris. I was just pondering Jared's thought that, and there may very well be a day when human forecasting is replaced by computer forecasting. Fortunately, for my sake, I'm already 25 years in the industry, and I better get out before that ever happens. But yeah, I would say right now there's just some rambling thoughts. We're still quite a ways from that. There's still, if we relied, your value as a meteorologist in forecasting is forecasting those extreme events. And those are where the computers really struggle, whatever model you're relying on. It's those things that there's very little history on it, that your advantage as a human forecaster can catch those things that a model maybe can't handle. So that's just a thought. There's many directions to go in the energy industry and with your meteorology degree, and I chose the forecasting side because I like that challenge, and fortunately that challenge is still there.
And on top of the forecasting part too, I think communicating risk, communicating uncertainty, communicating confidence, those are all things as well that the model can't do. I mean, even everyone always says the Euro is the top model. Even the Euro has its bad days, and the GFS beats up on it. So being able to just kind of communicate what the forecast means is, thankfully, that's one angle of it that'll probably be sticking around for quite some time. So we have that going for us.
Yep. There's a reason why there's still many different computer models out there, because there's not any one you can rely on all the time.
Awesome. So unless anyone else on the panel has anything else to say, I guess we will wrap this up. I want to thank everybody for listening in. Hopefully you found something useful and informative out of this. Someone did ask where we can find this when it's uploaded to YouTube. Stay tuned. I will have to figure that out. But anyone that registered for this webinar, I will have your email address. I will send out a note when that gets all squared away, so you will be made aware of when and where it shows up on the internet. So again, thank you very much to Brent, Chris, Jared, Zach. This was awesome, and hopefully other people found it as informative as I do, and look forward to doing this again. Again, too, if anyone has any comments or feedback, please let us know. If you have any ideas for future topics, we would love to make this a regular thing, perhaps maybe even have more ones with more interaction, perhaps. So yeah, we are happy to take any comments or feedback. and hope that whenever we have the next one roll around that you'll want to come along to that one too. So without further ado, good night everybody, and we'll see you next time.
Thanks, Eric.
Yep. Thanks, guys.